Julian adjusted the focus on his lens, staring at the golden canopy of trees ahead. "Profound, isn't it?" he asked, not turning around. "Mara, look at how the light hits that ridge." He waited for her to agree. He waited for the crunch of her boots on the dry leaves, but there was only the wind. It's a low, hollow whistle moving through the Tennessee pines. He turned around, smiling, expecting to see her tying her shoe or checking her phone. The trail behind him was empty. The air was still. In the span of 10 seconds, in the middle of a clear afternoon, his life had quietly, violently ended. He just didn't know it yet. The Great Smoky Mountains have a way of holding on to time. If you stand still long enough in the deep valleys of Tennessee, you start to feel like the modern world is a very distant, very fragile concept. The trees here are ancient sentinels, watching, waiting, and keeping their secrets close to the soil. It is a place of breathtaking beauty, where the mist rises like a living breath from the forest floor, earning these mountains their name. For Julian and Mara, this ancient beauty was exactly the point. They were people of the visual world. Julian was a graphic designer, a man of structure and lines. Mara was a painter, a woman of color and emotion. They had been together for 6 years, a relationship that moved with the easy, comfortable rhythm of a favorite song. They were due to be married in 3 months. They didn't come to the mountains to challenge nature. They weren't thrill seekers or survivalists. They were just two people in love looking for a backdrop. Mara wanted reference photos for a series of paintings she planned to gift Julian on their wedding day. She wanted the fiery reds of the sugar maples and the deep bruising purples of the twilight sky. It was mid-October. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that wakes you up and makes you feel alive. They parked their sedan at a trailhead near the border of North Carolina and Tennessee. It wasn't a remote forbidden zone. It was a well-marked path, popular with weekend hikers, though on this particular Tuesday, the lot was nearly empty. Julian remembers the sound of the car door slamming. He remembers the smell of the coffee still lingering in his travel mug. He remembers Mara laughing as she pulled her knit cap down over her ears, her breath forming small clouds in the air. She looked radiant, not in a glamorous way, but in a real, tangible way, was happy. "Let's go before we lose the light," she had said. Those were the first words of the hike. The woods welcomed them with a display of color that felt almost staged. The leaves were a burning canopy of orange and gold. The trail was soft with pine needles. They walked hand in hand for the first mile, talking about the wedding, about the table settings, about the future they were so certain they would have. The Appalachians are deceptive, though. They lull you into a sense of security with their beauty. But the geography is rugged. Steep ridges drop off into deep, unseen hollers. The weather creates its own microclimates. Can be standing in sunshine on one peak, while a storm rages in the valley next to you. As they hiked deeper, the atmosphere began to shift. The playful chatter died down, replaced by the exertion of the climb and the reverent silence of the deep woods. They stopped frequently for photos. Julian would capture the landscape. Mara would capture the details, the moss on a rock, the texture of bark, the way a fern curled in the shadow. They reached a fork in the trail around 2 p.m. The main path continued straight, but a smaller, less worn path veered to the left, toward a rocky outcrop that promised a view of the valley floor. "Just up there," Mara pointed. "I bet the light is perfect on the ridge." Julian hesitated. He was the cautious one. But the path looked safe enough, and the day was still bright. "Okay," he said. 10 minutes up? Then we turned back. They walked single file now. The path was narrower here, flanked by dense rhododendron thickets that formed sheer walls of green on either side. It felt like walking through a tunnel. Julian took the lead, pushing aside low-hanging branches. "It's quieter here," Mara noted from behind him. Her voice sounded slightly muffled, absorbed by the density of the vegetation. "Yeah," Julian replied. "It's peaceful." He didn't know it then, but that was the trap. The silence wasn't peace. It was the mountains holding their breath. The separation didn't happen with a bang. There was no scream, no sound of a struggle, no sliding of rocks. That is the thing that haunts Julian the most in the years that followed. The absolute unparalleled quiet of the tragedy. They had been on the side trail for perhaps 15 minutes. The terrain had become rockier, demanding more attention to their footing. Julian was looking for a specific vantage point, a clearing he could see through the trees ahead. "I think we're almost at the ledge," Julian called out, stepping over a fallen log, kept his eyes forward, focused on the sunlight breaking through the canopy ahead. "I'm going to stop for a second," Mara said. "My lace is loose," Julian said. "I'll be right at the clearing. Don't be long." He took 5 more steps, maybe 10. He walked into the clearing, and the view opened up before him. It was spectacular. The valley floor was a sea of autumn fire, rolling hills disappearing into the signature blue haze of the Smokies. He lifted his camera, framing the shot. He checked the aperture. He adjusted the shutter speed. He took 3 photos. He lowered the camera and turned around, ready to share the moment. "Mara, you have to see this, the way the light hits the..." He stopped. The trail behind him was empty. He smiled, shaking his head. "Come on, slowpoke," he called out playfully. He waited. A crow caught in the distance, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the valley walls. "Mara?" He walked back to the edge of the clearing, peering into the tunnel of rhododendrons they had just walked through. He expected to see her blue jacket. He expected to see her bending down. Nothing but green leaves and brown earth. A small prickle of irritation hit him. "Mara, stop messing around. It's getting late." Silence. The irritation dissolved instantly, replaced by a cold drop of unease in his stomach. He walked back down the trail, retracing his steps. "Mara," he shouted, louder this time. He reached the fallen log he had stepped over. This was where she said she was stopping. He looked at the ground. He saw the scuff mark of his own boot. He looked for hers. The ground was undisturbed. "Mara." He began to jog, then run. He ran back to the fork in the main trail, thinking maybe she had turned around. But that made no sense. She wouldn't leave him. He stopped at the fork, spinning in a circle. The woods, which had seemed so welcoming an hour ago, now looked identical in every direction. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow looked like a person. "Mara," his voice ripped through the air, raw and desperate. "Ow!" But the forest swallowed the sound instantly. The acoustic dampening of the dense woods was terrifying. He could scream at the top of his lungs, and the sound would die within 50 yards. He ran back up the side trail. Maybe she had fallen off the side. He scrambled through the thickets, tearing his clothes on the thorns, looking over the edge of the steep embankments. "Mara, please." He checked his phone. No signal, of course. Panic, cold and absolute, set in. It wasn't the rational panic of solving a problem. It was the primal panic of a prey animal. He was alone. And she was gone. As if she had evaporated into the mist that was slowly starting to curl around his ankles. The sun began to dip below the ridgeline. In the mountains, twilight is short. One moment it is day, the next, the shadows lengthen and merge into a solid wall of darkness. Julian's search became frantic. He lost the logic of a hiker. He scrambled off trail, sliding down ravines, calling her name until his voice was a ragged croak. He imagined terrible things. A bear? A snake? A sinkhole? But there was no evidence. No blood, no torn fabric, no disturbed earth. Just silence. By the time true darkness fell, Julian was exhausted, dehydrated, and bordering on hysteria. Managed to stumble back to the main trail, guided only by the faint reflection of the moonlight on the path. He had to get help. He had to leave her to save her. The logic tore him apart, but he knew he couldn't find her in the dark without a light. He ran the 3 miles back to the car, falling multiple times, bruising his ribs, cutting his hands. He reached the trailhead and drove like a madman to the nearest ranger station, flashing his high beams, honking his horn. The response was swift. The park rangers take missing persons reports seriously, especially as temperatures were dropping. Within 2 hours, a command post was established. Julian sat in the back of a Ranger SUV, wrapped in a shock blanket, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee he couldn't drink. He watched the lights, the red and blue strobe of the police cars, and the piercing white beams of the search and rescue teams heading into the tree line. "Mr. Vance," a ranger said gently, crouching down beside him, "we have dogs on the scent. We have thermal drones going up. She's there. We'll find her." Julian nodded, but he felt a strange detachment. Looking at the dark wall of the forest, he felt like the woods were mocking him. They looked so massive, so impenetrable. How could they find one small woman in millions of acres of wilderness? Search lasted all night. Julian refused to leave, stood by the trailhead watching the radio chatter. Team 1 to base. Nothing in Sector 4. Team 2 to base. K9 picked up a scent near the ridge, but lost it at the creek. Space to Air 1. Any thermal signatures? Negative base. The canopy is too thick. Morning broke with a heavy gray fog. The smoke of the mountains had descended, reducing visibility to near zero. It was the worst possible scenario for a search. The helicopters were grounded. Searchers had to move slowly, hand in hand, to avoid getting lost themselves. Julian joined the second wave of searchers against the advice of the medical staff. He went back to the log. He showed them exactly where he stood. He acted out the scene a dozen times. "She was right here," he pleaded. "She was just tying her shoe." The dogs circled the area. They whined. They paced. But they didn't bolt. It was as if her scent simply ended at the log, as if she had been lifted into the sky. Days turned into a week. The volunteer numbers swelled to over 200. People from the local towns came out, seasoned hikers, trackers, people who knew the mountains. They combed every inch of the grid. They rappelled down cliffs. They dived into the freezing pools of the streams. Nothing. Not a glove. Not a wrapper. Not a hair tie. On the 10th day, the sheriff pulled Julian aside. The look in the man's eyes broke Julian's heart before the words were even spoken. "Julian," the sheriff said, using his first name now, "they were scaling back. We're moving from a rescue operation to a recovery operation." "No," Julian whispered. "She's cold. She's waiting for me. We've covered the area 4 times, son. Nobody could survive these temperatures for 10 days without gear, I'm sorry." The official search ended. The volunteers went home to their families. The news vans packed up and left. The forest went quiet again. Most people eventually leave. They have jobs to return to, families to care for, bills to pay. The tragedy becomes a scar, and they learn to grow around it. Julian did not leave. He couldn't go back to their apartment in the city. Couldn't look at the unfinished paintings in her studio. Couldn't sleep in a bed that was half empty. He rented a small, drafty cabin in a town bordering the park. Took a leave of absence from his job, which eventually turned into a resignation. Spent his savings on topographical maps, high-end GPS gear, and hiking equipment. He became a fixture in the town. The locals knew him as the man who was waiting. They treated him with a mix of pity and wariness. He was a living reminder of the danger in their backyard. Every morning, Julian would pack his bag and head into the woods. He didn't hike randomly. He gridded the forest. He pushed further than the search teams had gone. He bushwhacked through thorns that tore his clothes. He climbed ridges that terrified him. He was looking for Mara, yes. But he was also looking for an answer. How does a human being physically vanish? The nights were the hardest. Alone in the cabin, he would go through the photos on his camera. The last 3 photos he took, the view of the valley. He zoomed in on every pixel, looking for a clue he missed. A shadow, a figure. He would call her phone, kept her service active, paying the bill every month. He knew the battery was dead. He He knew the phone was likely buried under a foot of mulch, but he called it anyway, just to hear her voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Mara. I'm probably painting or hiking. Leave a message. I'm still looking." He would whisper into the phone. "I haven't given up. I'm coming back tomorrow." The seasons changed. Winter brought heavy snows that locked the mountains down. Julian sat by the window, watching the white flakes bury the world, agonizing over the thought of her out there in the cold. Spring brought thaw and mud. Summer brought heat and insects. A year passed, then two. Julian changed. He grew thin. His eyes held a 1,000-yard stare. He stopped talking to the locals, became part of the landscape, a ghost haunting the edges of the living world. He felt closer to her in the woods than he did anywhere else. In the silence of the trees, he felt he could almost hear her breathing. He started to talk to her while he hiked. He pointed out the birds. He described the sunsets. He lived a life of two people, carrying the weight of her memory on his back like a heavy pack. 5 years. It had been 5 years since the day the silence took her. It was November again. The leaves were gone, leaving the trees bare and skeletal. Julian was hiking in a sector far from the original search site, nearly 4 miles away, in a deep ravine that was difficult to access. He wasn't expecting to find anything anymore. The hiking had become a ritual, a penance. He stopped to rest near the base of a massive oak tree, its roots twisting out of the ground like arthritic fingers. He saw something glinting in the dirt, half buried under years of decaying leaves. It wasn't a bone. It wasn't clothing. He reached down and brushed the dirt away. It was metal, a lens cap. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He dug frantically, his fingernails tearing into the cold earth. He pulled up a strap, then a body, not a human body, a camera body. It was Mara's DSLR. The casing was cracked, the lens shattered, and it was caked in mud. But the memory card slot was sealed tight. Julian sat there for an hour, just holding the camera, rocking back and forth, sobbing. He didn't look for her remains. If the camera was here, she had been here. But 5 years in these mountains leaves nothing behind. Nature claims everything back. He took the camera to a specialist in Knoxville. It cost him thousands of dollars he didn't have, but he needed to know. The technician warned him the card might be corrupted, that water damage usually destroys everything. Julian waited in the lobby for 3 days. Finally, the technician came out, holding a thumb drive. He looked pale. "We recovered 7 images," the man said softly, "from the day." Julian took the drive back to his cabin. He plugged it into his laptop. His hand shook so badly he could barely control the mouse. The first few photos were the ones he remembered. The leaves, the trail. A selfie of them, smiling, cheeks flushed with cold. Then the photos after the separation. The timestamps told the story. 2:15 p.m., a blurry photo of the ground. She must have dropped the camera or stumbled. 2:20 p.m., a photo of the trees angled sharply upward. She had fallen. The angle suggested she had slid down a steep embankment, likely hitting her head, disoriented. 4:45 p.m., a photo of a ridgeline. It wasn't the trail. She had tried to climb out, but she'd gone the wrong way. She had walked deeper into the wild, thinking she was heading back to him. 4:30 p.m., the sun was setting. The photo was dark, grainy. It was a photo of her own hand holding a small rock. And then the final photo. No, timestamp, 7:12 a.m. the next morning. It was a self-portrait. She had turned the camera on herself. The exposure was high, the morning sun blowing out the background. She looked tired. Her forehead was cut, her lips were chapped. But she wasn't crying. She was looking directly into the lens. She was smiling, a soft, sad, forgiving smile. She had held up a small piece of paper, a receipt from her pocket, on which she had written with an eyeliner pencil. The focus was soft, but Julian could read it. "I hear the helicopters. They're far away. I love you, Jay. Don't stop living. It's beautiful here." She hadn't died in terror. She hadn't died thinking he had abandoned her. She had died listening to the search, knowing he was looking, and she had used her last ounce of battery to tell him it was okay. Julian didn't bring the camera back. He didn't lead a new search party to disturb the ravine. He realized that the ravine was her cathedral now. He returned one last time to the spot where he found the camera. He didn't bring gear. He didn't bring a map. He brought a small canvas he had painted himself. It wasn't a masterpiece. He wasn't the painter. She was, but it was a painting of the two of them. Standing on a ridge, old and gray, holding hands, he wedged the canvas into the hollow of the oak tree. "I found you," he whispered to the wind. "And you found me." He stood up. The air was crisp. The sun was hitting the ridge, turning the world into fire and gold. For the first time in 5 years, Julian took a deep breath and didn't feel the weight of the silence. He turned around and began the long walk back to the trailhead. Walked alone, but the woods didn't feel empty anymore. The mist curled around him, not as a trap, but as a blanket. The mountains keep their secrets. But sometimes, if you listen closely enough, they let you say goodbye.